My name is Grace Fiacco. I am a fourth-year physics major and the president of RIT's Game Symphony Orchestra. Woo! Yay! Dave, your turn. I thought we were just going down the...
Hi, my name is Joseph Hong. I'm a third-year student in RIT with game design and development major, also a music and technology minor. I'm the librarian in Game Symphony Orchestra.
Woohoo!
And I am David Sylvester. I'm also another librarian in the RIT Game Symphony Orchestra.
Soon to be conductor.
Yeah, I'm a third-year mechanical engineer. Fancy that. And I also run the YouTube channel DS Music. So, yeah, that's a thing. And we are about to take you on a journey of a lifetime, so let's get right into it. The truth behind your favorite game music, what makes Melodies memorable.
Yeah.
So, let's just start out why this panel came to be, all right? So last year, I had this panel with our boy Danny Lopatka and another guy in RIT Game Symphony Orchestra. We talked about Final Fantasy music. And so I had to talk about Final Fantasy 13 because I really like it. And during the panel, I was asked, I made the point that it was good music, but it wasn't very memorably composed. And some guy asked me afterward, well, why is that? Why isn't it very memorably composed? And to be honest, I didn't have an answer for him. So if that guy is in the audience today, this is your year-long answer to that question about why Final Fantasy 13 music is or isn't memorable. And actually, after listening to the entire OST in the Final Fantasy 13 2 and 13 3's soundtracks all throughout the year...
We don't talk about that game.
Okay. I would like to completely retract my statement from last year, which I would like to say, yes, it is memorable, but very subjectively, which I will explain later. Also, this panel is mildly based off of this book, which I got. Back when I was a wee lad in high school, I got this fun little book called Musemathics, which lots of pages, no pictures. And my dad gave it to me. He's like, oh, you won't understand a thing of it. And I got to chapter 3. Oh, yeah?
Keep talking, Dave.
So I got to chapter 3 of it. And yeah, that's about where I lost it. So I wanted to see if this book could help me years later to try to answer this mystery of what makes some music good, what makes it some more emotionally impactful, and so on and so forth.
It's not. Sorry.
So,
That's also not the right screen. It might have been better if we just kept the other one in.
All right.
Well, now people who are coming in late aren't missing anything.
Also, just for your entertainment, this panel will feature a recorder that I got in 3rd grade. Yay! Some entertainment.
Start playing music.
Music.
Okay.
Okay, Dave, where's the screen?
Oh, you got it. It's right there. Right there.
Oh no! Don't look.
mean-
Wait, are we going on to the next slide?
Yes.
All right. All right, we're just gonna keep on going now that we have the screen up again. So, let's start. The one thing I want to drive in from the very beginning before we really get into the meat of this talk is that music is art. It is not a hard science. You can't open up a textbook and it'll tell you all of the secrets of how to create music and melodies and all of that. There's definitely music theory and stuff, but the basis of it is an art form. It is subjective to the person composing, to the person listening. There is no science. It's a lot of hard speculation and observation, and a lot of this panel came from looking at other people's methods and our own personal experiences with the music. So a definition I want to give is non-deterministic methodology, aka art. It is when the same inputs create variable outputs. Every single time you put in these inputs, you get something different. This is in contrast to a deterministic methodology, which is an algorithm. So the same inputs would always give you the same outputs. It's repeatable.
A good example of this is like cooking eggs. You can definitely try to make an omelet, but depending on how you make it and your personal takes, your omelet might come out differently. Like it might be nice and spicy. It might be plain. It might be completely burnt if you're a cook like me. And it's all just dependent on the subjectivity of the creator.
I don't like eggs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, creating music is not a hard science. There's no equations that can tell you how to do it. And a nice quote that I liked is, music is a production of culture and critique evolving with time. It's always changing. It's not stagnant. It's something that moves with us.
All right, ready?
Next.
All right, so before we get started on how these ditties we know become memorable, we just have a little bit of the basics on what is a melody, sort of like what is perceiving music. Let's break it down. So, in a very, very, very basic sense of the word, I'm going to try to keep the music theory to a minimum, but melodies are just a sequence of notes with different intervals differentiating the notes. So now, what are intervals? As you can see in this diagram, intervals are basically the spaces between each note. For example, you have your unison, which is the same note, your second, which is like a note right next to another note, and so on and so forth. You have two types of intervals. You have your consonant and your dissonant intervals. One of the main consonant intervals, or basically sound good intervals, is the octave and the unison, because these basically describe notes that are the same, but as in the case of the octave, they're technically different. For those of you who know a little bit about audio engineering, each note resonates at a certain frequency. So notes like in the octave, like E4 and E5, they're technically the same note, but the E5 resonates at a frequency that's twice the frequency of the E4. So they have a nice, even separation between them. Whereas the other intervals, which some of them are more dissonant or chaotic in a way, they have not as even spaces between their frequencies. So that's a lot of music theory to boil into one slide. But basically, it's just a combination of these intervals that are in a melody, interests and surprises our brain and leaves us with uncertainty. It's this combination of dissonance and consonance that leaves us, that gives interest to a melody. So
a little bit more on intervals. This is not going to be very music theory heavy because I don't actually know music theory. But music tends to imitate nature. With a lot of music compositions, try to recreate sounds and experiences that we see in nature. And so intervals are very prominent throughout a lot of natural events, which is why we tend to use them a lot. Our brain is also programmed to pick out patterns and to help us make sense of situations, which is why patterns is very prominent in music. It helps us orient ourselves. It helps us pick out what is going on in the music we're listening to. Our ears are very, very, very sensitive to intervals. So they act as anchor points in the music. Ooh, I can't see my notes. It's why we find things that have pattern and order to it is more attractive than complete chaos and a lot of random notes like bombarding our ears. No one wants to listen to that. Next. Right. Yep.
So let's take a quick delve into Chapter 9 of Musomathics, Composition and Methodology. This is basically the chapter that describes ways that we as humans have tried to create artificial formulas for music. And a good quote to describe it is, composing is about the manipulation of interest, effect, and attention. And you probably want to remember some of those last three terms, interest and attention and effect. So let's look at one of the ways that people have tried to put together music. So people have asked, what if you just took nice bits of music and took these ordered bits of music and played them randomly? So music is a balance between expectation and surprise. Randomness and chance depends on the interest of the listener. Some examples of music that use this sort of ordered randomness technique are, sorry if I butchered this pronunciation, but Klavierstück 11, composed by Stockhausen in 1956. This is basically a large selection of mini measures of music, and the pianist is able to pick and choose these measures of music in any order they want and create a song out of it, which incorporates the randomness of picking the music, whereas it also has the order of having pre-composed measures. Another example of music that you might be more familiar with is the field music from Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Let's just get the audio started real quick. So this is basically music that occurs pseudo-randomly while you're just riding throughout the field. And it's a selection of piano sound effects that might occur at different intervals and you're never quite sure when they'll happen. So, while this is a technique people may use, people have often critiqued the Breath of the Wild soundtrack for sounding too airy, not very memorable, like doesn't have a direction. And there's pieces like this that bring to attention what people, the general negative thoughts toward ordered randomness. Like, the music sounds nice, but there's no real connection that you can make to it since it's basically just random notes being played at different orders. Other questions people have asked about open-ended music is that, does open-ended music require a knowledge of its lack of formal structure from the listener? Basically, do you have to know that it's random? Because if you know it's random, then you can expect it to be random, which makes it less random, ironically. Do you need multiple listens of a song? Does it need to be recorded? Because if you play random music in a recorded setting, then when people listen back to it again, it will be the same thing every time, so they'll eventually be expecting this randomness. Or do you play random music live? Because then you can play something different every single time. So, in order to answer this question, we need to take a brief look at pure randomness and why everyone disliked that. So, let's look at this period of music history called Deconstructionism. It's basically a period of time where mathematicians tried to associate different note values with different numerical values, create these complicated nonlinear formulas for almost as pure random values as possible, associate notes with it, and put it into a song. So it basically sounds like just pure randomness. And ironically, this fails at its own goal of being random, because deconstructionism was designed to erase the expectation of expecting something, which in itself evolves its own brand of expectation where we expect the unexpected at any corner. Or basically, we're always expecting it to be random, so we're not interested in it being random. Also, using a preconceived formula for surprise goes against its own formula. It goes against its own purpose, though, because since there's the formula for surprise, it's not really surprising. You've made it through a formula. And here's why we don't like it. You should probably remember this quote for later. Music is a balance between expectation and surprise, where on one hand, you want to be able to expect what comes next, but not all the time. Sometimes you want something new to hear, whereas if you hear something that you expect all the time, you get bored, whereas if you only hear new stuff all the time, you'll lose interest. True randomness ruins whatever a ditty or a melody might be developing, because it doesn't develop anything, it just throws random notes at you. You have to be able to, when you're composing a song, you have to be able to consider the whole structure of the melody, along with the past sections that you have already created, along with future actions that you might want to develop on. And so people have asked, well, there's this balance between expectation and surprise, and how can we capture this analytically with like computer programs? And so we start getting into AI. There's this, using the Monte Carlo methods. It's basically a method, kind of like the deconstructionist era where they assign note values with different numerical values, except these formulas use probabilities. Given that something happened before, what's the probability that it might happen again, or that something new might happen? Reducing the, so one example of Monte Carlo methods is the Iliac suite for string quintet, which is created by the Iliac computer and using Monte Carlo methods in order to make string quintet, which in 4 movements, which I'm going to play a little bit of the 3rd movement, which I thought was the most interesting personally. So a few notes I had while listening to this song is that if you listen to the whole thing in context, it actually does sound surprisingly good for music technically made through random methods. Even the random bits sounded kind of cohesive. Like if any of you have ever listened to Stravinsky, a lot of his music is really dense and sounds like there's just a bunch of stuff happening, but you can sort of make sense of it in a weird sort of way. I feel like so this song is performed by human players who are performing the music that is generated by the computer. And the human players definitely humanize the piece by giving it expression and articulation. But there's definitely, for me, there was this uncanny valley sort of moment where it sounds like a real piece that could be written by a real person, and it sounds just like random notes thrown together by a computer.
Sounds like a squeaky board.
There's no real development of any particular themes or motifs, but there's definitely some sort of cohesion in the melody. So this method is actually proven to work in some contexts, such as trying to replicate more orthodox compositional styles, such as Bach chorales. There was this experiment called the Bach 389 chorale harmonizations, where computers were able to mostly replicate the style of the Bach chorale. One other method I want to briefly touch on is EMI, experiments in musical intelligence. So one critique people had about like Monte Carlo methods, which use probability in order to create melodies, is that human knowledge remains relatively flexible in the face of novel insights and developments. It does not seem likely that human learning happens by piling up lists of rules. So people ask, can we model musical learning in an AI? Now this might sound like some sort of Terminator stuff. Can we have robots outdo our composers? But in a very basic sense of the word, in a very basic way, this, even I don't understand all of it, but people were able to use this programming form called, that replicated neural networks, which basically tries to imitate how our brains respond to stimuli and make sense of things, where it is like nodes and neural connections and feedback loops and all this fun stuff. And one example of a song written by EMI was Virtual Mozart, where the system was able to analyze a ton of works of Mozart, like hundreds of works of Mozart, and use that in order to create its own neural network that could create its own original works based on the style of Mozart, which, according to the Turing test, which is a measure for machine intelligence, some people have actually considered this to be an intelligent AI, because if you listen to these virtual Mozart pieces and you didn't know it was written by a computer, lots of people would say, oh, this sounds like Mozart. I probably couldn't tell the difference between a computer and Mozart. So it makes this sort of intelligent. But the downside to this is that it always requires human input in order to get the connection started. The computer can't make its own melodies. It has to analyze a whole ton of works from other composers in order to make their melodies. So since it still requires human basis of established works to draw from and not original thought, we like to look a bit at how these human composers in the first place manipulated our emotions through their compositions and how the brain interprets music from other humans. So as you've probably seen through the past couple of slides, there's this balance between expectation and surprise. And one part in the book that I really like a lot, that I probably can't get into the whole thing, it's one of my favorite parts of the book, is this analogy for expectation surprise called Music Dictation from Hell 101. Basically, it's a story about this class where its professor is it's a transcribing class, so the students have to write down whatever the professor plays on the piano. On the first day of the class, he plays the same note on the piano for an hour straight, and of course, it's not very interesting. On the second day of the class, he plays the C major scale for an hour straight, and they have to transcribe that. Also easy to transcribe, not very interesting. On the third day, he plays every note on the piano in random order, but only once. So at first, it's really hard to try to figure out what notes he's playing, but as he starts getting down to a more confined range of notes, it gets easier to tell apart. On the fourth day, he plays every single note on the piano randomly, and of course, that's chaos. And on the fifth day, he's not even there at the piano. He tells the students to go to the beach, write down the frequency of the waves, and no one can do that. They'll give up. I guess they're not going to graduate. So this analogy is basically a demonstration of redundancy versus uncertainty, where redundancy is our expectation. It's what we have heard before and what we're expecting to hear again, whereas uncertainty is the surprise. It's what new things might happen that we might be interested in. And it's this balance of order, redundancy, and the taste of the composers, or the uncertainty, that leads to a style of a composer. So this is an example to show this balance between redundancy and uncertainty is the Twitter sax solo me. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but it's a beautiful piece of artwork that many jazz students should definitely analyze for future reference. very bopping, am I right?
This is what I would do as a solo.
So yeah, it's a solo to say the least. And
Where'd it go?
where'd it go?
Oh.
There it goes.
No. You need to drag that screen off. It's on top of it. No, just drag it off. Oh wait.
It disappeared.
It ran away.
Wait, let me just condense these windows real quick.
Dave, what did you do?
I've created a monster.
Go back to the page. Not that one.
There we go.
No, that's our notes.
I swear we know what we're doing.
It's gone. Wait, put it back on presentation mode. Try that.
All right. Easy.
There we go.
And-
It's back.
Yes, we back. So now that I've sufficiently ruined that joke, as you can see, that is utmost redundancy. You have the same note playing over and over again, and our interest in it decreases until it reaches 0, because our expectation is, oh, it's always going to be the same thing. They're never going to start an actual solo. They're just going to keep honking on the honk note. So another example on the opposite end of the spectrum is the main theme from Crazy Bus.
I love this one.
Yes, I'm sorry for the sudden explosion of Crazy Bus. But yes, as you can see, this is the other end of the spectrum where we have maximum uncertainty. It's just random notes being played, which also leads to minimum interest, since our expectation is that it will always be random and we really can't tell what's going on. So yeah, so as you can see, we need to have a balance between redundancy and uncertainty in order to have good music.
Let's go. Alrighty, so now into the less technical side. A lot of music relies on personal experiences. So again, music is art. I said this in the beginning, I'm going to say it 1,000 more times. It's very heavily dependent on experiences, your emotion, your thoughts, your personal experiences growing up. So things like your social environment and the culture you come from, strong emotions that happen in certain parts of your life, a lot of nostalgic memories, things like that play into a lot of music composition, and that's what makes things really stick with you. So some memories are not musically memorable. It's just that they are associated with memories that resonate with you, which makes them stick more. Also, I really like that picture you're holding. I really like it. No, you're fine. I really like it. Sorry, I had to say that. All right, moving on.
Boyo.
Yeah. So a technique that a lot of composers use in video games is repetition. The more you hear a melody, the easier it is to remember.
Redundancy.
Yes. And a concept that I want to bring up is leitmotif, which is a short, constantly reoccurring musical phrase associated with particular people, places, or ideas. And this is a reason why a lot of video games have that one melody that they use throughout all of their songs. It's so you hear it over and over again, it sticks with you. And one example that I like to play is the prelude from Final Fantasy I. Play it. Play it. Everyone, even if you haven't played a Final Fantasy series, this is a melody that if you hear it, you hear those arpeggios, you just know it's Final Fantasy. It screams Final Fantasy just because they use it in so many different ways all throughout the games. It's just a staple piece of music, and I love this. And then the choir comes in later, and it's just so good. But I don't think we have time to listen to it all, so let's move on. Oh, wait. Oh. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Go on, Joe.
So, for people who play a lot of video games or listen to a lot of video game music, you might have, you'll definitely have one or more times when you find a scene that's like really memorable, something that sticks to your memory, something that you can feel sympathy to the characters or just feel sad, happy, just something. So emotion can be another big key that makes the music memorable. So music lights up the same neurosciences that emotion and memory does. So it makes it makes it easier to make memorable. So our brain is programmed to latch onto music that makes us feel emotions, basically. So that's why it's easier to remember emotions. It's sometimes easier to remember melodies better than the melodies. So some of the examples that we have where emotions can latch onto music is To Zanarkand and Undertale.
Yeah, To Zanarkand's one of my favorite Final Fantasy songs ever. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I was dressed up as Yuna yesterday. And so To Zanarkand, we don't have a sound clip. I'm just going to briefly describe like what it makes you feel. So it represents Titus's desire to return home all throughout the game. Like that is that sad, soulful melody that's always playing. It starts the game off like that, and then the game also, it follows you throughout the game, and it just represents his desire to return home and the continual realization that he might not be able to ever again. It's very sad, it's very melancholy, and it's full of yearning that builds to that acceptance at the end. It tells his whole story, and it also resonates deeply within you, because I'm sure everyone has felt lost and sad wanting to return home at some point in their life. Now, Joe's going to give us a more in-depth study of Undertale.
You want me to start now or wait a bit?
In a bit. So Undertale is one of my favorite games, and one of the reasons why I love this game is because of the music. And this song, Undertale, which has the same title as the game Undertale, is
I'll think about that one.
creativity, right? So it is played at the end, almost at the end of the game, and it has a reason why it's called the title Undertale. So play it.
Let's go.
So this song is played when the player reaches to the at the final stage, and the monsters or the NPC of the game just comes out one by one and talks about their side of the story. So it's a tale about their underground, hence it's called Undertale. It's as they talk more about their story, you start to feel more emotions about what happened between the monsters and the humans. This is also a really interesting piece, because out of all the pieces, this is the only song that used real instruments. Other songs they use digital samples or electric sounds, but this has been this was played by real guitar, strings, and the entire orchestra. Makes it so that it makes it more genuine. It can have some out of tunes or imperfect sounds, but that makes it more sincere to talk to, so that what the monsters say about them is real. As you can see, the transition between a simple piano solo with a guitar to a full orchestra makes a grand finale of the whole game. And the melody that you hear is the main theme of the song, of the game Undertale, which has been used over and over again, which is another example of leitmotif. So as you go to the final stage of the game, this kind of captures the moment of like just being having an adventure in the underground with them, which makes it really memorable. And
that's probably it.
yeah,
Yes. Alrighty, on to our last section.
So,
Forward.
So for the next part, we'll talk about how melodies were created over time. Different technologies were used in different times. So the way that the composers compose their melodies are different, and we'll also discuss how the composition methods are sometimes effective or not. So NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, was one of the older consoles released in 1983, and at this there was Atari, and the whole idea of playing games at your house was kind of uncommon. And also one of the things that was common is having a video game music in a video game, because it was there wasn't any big samples at that time. So one of the big problem at this era was data space, as if data storage inside this console. So, because at this time, composers can't just put like an orchestra or like a concert band, just so that it's so limited. Also, one of the other things that the composers had to figure out is how long the pieces are, because unlike movies or music videos or just any other media, we don't really know how long each player plays. Some people could play over an hour, some can finish in 5 minutes, so that was another problem. So this is where composers have to be really creative in a very limited space. So one of the great examples, one of the great methods that the composers used was music loops. So basically having a small section of music, just looping it over and over again, so the player can hear it constantly until it meets a certain condition, like beating a level or getting killed by an enemy.
Yep.
So Super Mario Brothers is a really great example of there's tons of just creating a really great music at this time. It is really so the composer of this game, Kaji Kondo, did a really great job of making every single sound effects and the music getting into this early console.
Do you want to start playing something?
Sure. So these are the loops that are played in the game. So one is just a underworld. It's an underworld theme, and you can notice it's just 8 seconds for that one loop. So it's really short. Another example is the castle theme, which sounds really complex, but one loop is just 6 seconds. And even a shorter theme is the Starman theme, which is just 4 seconds, and it's being looped over and over again. So this is how all the music was able to put it in the game. Even the sound effects, everything that you hear from fireballs to one-ups, if you combine all of them together, it's just 50 seconds. So these are the things that are still iconic to this day. You can still hear this in recent Mario games. It's surprising that how everything that you hear in this game that makes the game complete, if you combine everything into a single track, including the overworld, castle theme, underworld, even the game over scene, it's merely just slightly more than 3 minutes. So that's a really great way to put everything in it. Another thing that he thought about was that instead of focusing on different instrumentations, he wanted to make of. Another way he focused on was, instead of having variety on instrumentation, he wanted to make different styles so that each track sounded really unique. For example, the underworld theme is more of a waltz, and overworld is jazzy. Castle theme has very consistent but fast tempo. So every single track is unique and different. They can be easily be distinguishable. So having them repeated over and over and having them unique taste really makes the music memorable in this time.
So again, you can see the balance between redundancy, having these loops that play over again, and also surprise, where we have very unique tracks that you experience throughout the game.
Next.
All right. And moving on, and now we're really playing with power. We're moving on to the Super NES. So this was a 16-bit console, and it had quite a bit of upgrades from the NES. And if you want to hear more about the specifics of how these consoles upgraded themselves, you can go to Noah Castro's panel at 5:30, where he's talking about sound fonts and how game music was programmed. So, besides the fact that they basically ran all their music on the main CPU, which is another story in and of itself, there was more room on these updated consoles to be able to experiment with sound textures. The NES only had 5 audio channels, where the SNES had more. So because of this more, people were able to experiment with more fully immersive effects that weren't necessarily just melody dependent. Of course, you have your examples of very catchy tunes like Corneria from Star Fox. However, you also have your examples of tunes that people remember, but not just for being catchy, but also for the atmosphere that they were able to remember and associate emotions with, such as aquatic ambience from Donkey Kong Country, and the one that I want to talk about, Brinstar Red Soil Wetland Area from Super Metroid, which this song haunted me the first time I heard it, and hopefully I can show you why. So, first of all, let me just give some background on the setting. You're in this area called like the Red Tower or something. It's this red, desolate, like hellish type area where the doors in it lead to lava areas which you can't explore yet since you don't have the upgrades. And if you're a noob like me when you first play Super Metroid, you don't know how to wall jump up here. So you fall down here and, oh, whoops, you're trapped. You can't get out. There's enemies everywhere. You could possibly die. Uh-oh, it's dark and spooky. Help, Mom, get me out of here. So let me just start playing the tune for you. And as you can hear, it very spookily starts with a very slow crescendo in the bass, which didn't normally happen in the NES, but with the SNES, they had more room for a programming volume like that. You hear some open intervals in this dull synth in the background going bum, 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 bum. It has a very repetitive and dissonant bass line, which is also spooky, and then he comes in the choir with this chant-like motif. This kind of gives off the impression that you're stuck in hell and not the Doom kind where you can slay demons and whatnot. You're stuck in here in this Dante's Inferno sort of area. Also, you might notice, or not notice, the lack of hard-hitting percussion. Instead of like a catchy drum beat, you just hear this airy, repetitive, and the melody is played by a very airy sort of flute, which plays a basic primal type melody instead of something like catchy or spacey like Corneria. And the instrumentation choice of using like a Native American sort of flute helps us associate this music with something more primal and like more spooky, which associates with our cultural history. And then this piercing piano comes in, which kind of hits you. Like, first you were just hearing these like spooky tones, but now it's hitting at you with this irregular 3+5 rhythm, which goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead of just like normal 4, 4. And just as you start to expect that, you get that measure, which is weird and different. It subverts your expectation and introduces more surprise and fear, which is basically what this tune is meant to convey. So it helps you capture that emotion of fear and being trapped, and that's what makes it very memorable.
Next. All right, so another thing that is pretty common, especially in the less famous games from less famous companies, is budget limitations. A lot of times when you don't have a lot to work with, it forces you to think out of the box to make some sounds that most people can take for granted in their composing. So it leads to unique characteristics and qualities to soundtracks. And some good examples are the Supergiant games like Bastion or Pyre or Transistor. I'm going to talk about Bastion in the next slide. And then another game that I stumbled upon, I actually did not know much about this game before like last week, was Stardew Valley. And I found out that this game was composed, mixed, programmed, art done by one person. Only one person made the entire thing. And like that is just what a lot of time can do. He was an unemployed CS major, and so he spent 4 years and made music through just sound fonts, and it became very, very popular very, very quickly. And now this is a really big soundtrack. So let's go on to Bastion. Just start playing the first one, because it's just nice. So the first song is Zia's theme, her Build That Wall. So Bastion was the first Supergiant game, and they had a very low budget. It was a small group of friends who made this game together, and Darren Korb, the composer, had no money to buy musicians. So his recording studio was in his basement. He just played guitar for all of these tracks and had one vocalist sing all of the songs. And so it was just the two of them and instrument loops and samples, and that is how they made the entire soundtrack. And it gives it a very folky tone to the game. Like everything sounds very airy and folky and kind of serious, just due to the acoustics that they used. And it's a very characteristic soundtrack. You listen to this and you know it's not like Nintendo or Square Enix. It's very much Supergiant. And a lot of their soundtracks keep this characteristic even as they gain more money. All right. So reactivity is another thing that composers need to balance when making things for video games. So music needs to be adaptable to the actions of the players within the events of the game. Like you can't just have melodies everywhere. Sometimes you need more ambient and like more intense music, like battle themes that need to increase intensity as you beat different bosses and move up the levels and things are very intense. Like the music should also increase, otherwise it feels kind of empty and lacking. Or puzzles, there needs to be certain puzzle themes. It can't just be your world theme. And in-game emotions are really important too. Music drives the emotions that you're trying to convey in the game. So having special songs for different emotions that your character is experiencing is very important. And game interactivity limits the use of melody, because the more you interact with things, the less you're going to be focused on the music. So having big melodies playing throughout a lot of like your open world scenes is going to take away from the gaming experience. But you don't want like open world soundtracks when you're in a scripted cutscene, because the melody is the reason that you are invested in what is happening on that screen in that point in time. So it's just a balance between enhancing and driving your story with melody and enhancing your gameplay with ambient music that you don't need to focus on all the time. And that is a really big balance that a composer needs to hit for a successful video game and successful music.
Playing with music loops is another way of how the composers sparked creativity, which led to making the music more memorable. So back when I talked about the early times, the NES, just keeping the music in loop was kind of the key of because the space was so limited. Now that technology has evolved and can put actual music in there, composers actually some composers thought of keeping the loop, because that will keep the players in the flow of the game. Having that theme will let the player know what they're playing. They wanted, despite that, they wanted to kind of make it an experiment and try to build up, or just making a new, adding new layers to make the game more memorable. So the two examples that I'll be talking about is Rosalina's Observatory from Super Mario Galaxy and Map Theme from Yoshi's Island. Both have some build-up layers, which makes the music fresh and like better every time. So So this is Rosalina's Observatory. You can hear this when you play Mario and when he's just in the, let's just say it's like a menu where Mario can explore Comet Observatory and get levels. So this is a very spacey, ambient waltz type of music where it's very relaxing. It's the beginning of the game, and it's very empty. Like it's just nothing but the core and its basic few lanes that the Mario can explore. As you can see, you can hear flutes, and it's very there's not that much instruments going on. The point of it is to keep it simple, to just have a place where Mario can simply explore without and then it builds up to more orchestrated, like it's a chamber orchestra where strings add on to. This happens when Mario collects more stars and beats more bosses. So it shows the progression of the adventure that Mario had. So you can hear that the emptiness that you've heard from the previous version is kind of covered by more instruments, and it becomes more orchestrated, more memorable, and Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is where this is the final version of the piece where brass and woodwinds add onto, which turns into from a chamber orchestra to full symphony orchestra. And this is when Mario is almost done with the adventure. So you can feel it. The music is finally complete. That's the whole point of the game, where the observatory that he travels on is almost done. It's almost at the complete form. Another example is Yoshi's Island map theme, where if you can listen, it's just a simple 16-beat 4-measure theme. It's very repetitive. In order to avoid boredom of just this repeating, the composer added on instrumentation whenever Yoshi moves on to the next world, so you can hear the percussion when it moves from World 1, World 2. So this is another great way to just show how much like the progress of Yoshi, just moving on to the next world, just beating levels as much as possible, and just continuing the exploration. You can hear the low bass, the low strings, and as you move on, you can hear the brass. And then as you go to the and then it becomes more of a full ensemble, which I think is really cool. Just having that simple 16-bit melody and turning into an actual piece that kind of tells you that you're almost done. So this, yeah, and having that unique way of building up layers into a simple melody into a complete score makes it really memorable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right. So, now, after we've given you all this nonsense and shenanigans, you think we might have a final verdict on, what is the standard way to make a 100% chart-topping tune? Well, we don't. Our conclusion is it's complicated. So, as you see, there's plenty of techniques that composers use in order to make their music, but no one or the other 100% certifies that your music is going to become the next Megalovania. There are certain factors that help create iconic tunes, given that you can read your audience and your culture that you are creating your game in. But the fundamentals of sound and music are ultimately influenced by subjective human response, how people react to certain songs. Like, I could be a person who completely likes random noise, and Crazy Bus main theme is my bop 100% of the time. Not everyone's like that, but maybe you are. And this is accounted for through our unique combinations of knowledge, our psyche, and our preference, which is subjective, evolving with our culture and the culture of the gaming industry. There are many internal factors, such as us, and external factors, such as hardware or budget limitations, which can affect how games are designed and what people expect of certain games and their soundtracks. And now, going back to that dude from a year ago and the Final Fantasy XIII fiasco, I just want to say that Final Fantasy XIII is still a great soundtrack. I love it to death, personally. But that's just me. And Grace likes it. She's actually played the game.
Yeah, I actually like the game. I'm like one of the... Yeah, see, 2 people. There's only 2 people I know. Yeah. One of the people that doesn't hate it.
So the thing is that, as you can see, there are people that enjoy it. It's just that I only personally remember it due to my subjective music taste. I like the way it's produced, I like the way the melodies are constructed, and I like the way the textures work in the songs. However, the reason people don't remember it is, in general, it was hidden by a decent game that wasn't received well. So people assume, oh, the game wasn't good? I guess the soundtrack isn't good either. So then it just lies in the wayside for all but the cult fans.
Bye-bye.
So our takeaway from all of this is, whether you're making music for yourself or for a game, or you're just listening to your favorite game tunes, hopefully you can now see how composers of these tunes can integrate both knowledge from the past era of gaming and music, the cultural facets and their limitations from the present and what they'd have to work with, and their future visions of how they want their music to go and the direction of their music, in order to balance the expectation and the surprise, in order to create a memorable emotional impact in the listener, and that is what creates memorable gaming music. I'd like to
guys.
Thank you all. This was a
Woo!
This was a lot of stuff to dig through and a lot of weird emotional and mental baggage, but we hope we were able to clarify up this at least a little bit for you guys.
And
so
I
if you
didn't
have
talk
any,
about Kingdom Hearts once, which is a shame.
So if you have any questions about Kingdom Hearts, I guess.
No. Yes. I mean, yes.
Or you can either contact us at. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Come up if you have questions. We can sit and chat. We'd love to talk to you.